Afternoon, everyone. Sorry, yeah. Just get set up really there, really. So I think, yeah, sort of thanks, John, for the introduction. That was really good introduction. But I think the main was, I think, as you mentioned about the pharmaceuticals. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry only for the last about 2 months or so, really. But I think as John mentioned, there are good challenges in that industry. I don't know if anybody is from pharmaceutical up here at all. Anybody from pharmaceuticals? No? Okay. There's some good serious challenges. Okay, there's one at least there, really. That's good. So I think there's some good serious challenges, especially because they do a lot of the testing in terms of medication and all those stuff. They've got clinical, they've got all the, a lot of their, generally the spend is on the R&D, about 50 or 70 million. I mean, for the industry, I mean, for the company I work for, they spend about 70 million or so actually in just developing medicines and doing the R&D basically for it. Imagine if somebody actually stole the details and all the, the confidential kind of sensitive material for that, really. That would be really a huge, massive loss for the industry. So I think it's definitely an industry which is, sort of quite serious about security. Now, I'm not going to be talking much about the security today, really, but I'm going to be focusing more on the GDPR, because coming up May, it's only 4 months from today, I believe. I'm sure somebody's reminded that already, really. So it's about 120 days left now. Now, just to give a bit of a disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer in any way, so don't hold up me on, on my name on that. But yeah, I'm not even a vendor as well, so don't worry about it. You can ask me questions. You can, feel free. I've worked on GDPR for the last couple of years now, since actually the law was passed actually in 2016, really. So I've been purely focused on GDPR, and that's been my kind of interest as well, actually, to be honest. So I'm not an expert still, of course. I don't claim to be calling an expert of myself. I'm still learning. There's a lot to learn, of course, in this kind of the huge legislation coming up in the next few months, really. I was going to say next year, but it's not next year anymore, really. But anyway, so I think, so basically I am an end user. I'm preparing as well, actually, with the organizations I work for. I'm preparing for the GDPR. We've been in this journey for the last, at least, as I mentioned, with the current organization, about 2 months now. I've been previously with a retail company I was working for, been through all that, really. So there's a lot to do, really, in that aspect of it. I'm still a learner, but I still learning on a day-to-day basis. So the next 20 minutes, I'm just going to be talking purely about what is it. I don't think I probably would need to talk about what is it anymore. I'm sure everybody knows about GDPR. I'm sure they kind of get used to that term, really. So often these days, it's like every single person is talking about GDPR. Is there anyone, actually, who hasn't started any preparation? Probably should be the other way question, actually. Is there anyone who is concerned in the room about how their kind of program is approaching or progressing with GDPR? Do you see concerns? Is it possible to, hit the deadline of May 25th May, whatever it is? Do you see yourself, in a good shape as of now? Well, firstly, I think probably just by head, quick hands, really. How comfortable, how many of you feel comfortable about your program in your business, really, actually? Brilliant. Good few numbers, really. That's quite good to know, actually. So I think some of the challenges I've seen is I'm speaking to, other people, actually, outside the industry. I do speak quite a lot in other places, really. So I think I've noticed is a lot of people are still kind of catching up with the concept of GDPR, still kind of getting to know exactly what needs to be changed, what needs to be done for it. So, that's good to know. At least some of you are actually quite on the ball with that and feel comfortable with the program you're handling with that. So I think what I'm going to be talking about is just a few bit of tips around, what to look for in the, approach to May 2015, really. How can you cut some time to get there, really? Because it can be really challenging for the amount of work you might probably want to do. And some takeaways with that, really. So quick 2 slides, I think, on GDPR. I'm not going to talk too much about GDPR in terms of what it is. I'm sure everybody knows about GDPR. The 7 or 8 principles, basically, it's all about making sure that you give the control of the data back to the data subjects in terms of what they can do about it. The key principles are basically being fair to the data subjects who you collect data on, being lawful, so having a lawful reason for using that particular data that you collect, being transparent. So the key is, if you're collecting or gathering or processing any kind of personal data on individuals, you want to make sure you are transparent in terms of what you're doing with it in your organizations. That's the key kind of the aspect of it, which means you've got to update all your privacy notices and all that kind of at every touch point, wherever you kind of interact with the customers or the data subjects that you collect personal data on. Data minimization, really simple. Actually, you got to make sure you collect only the data that you really need for the processing in that particular process or in that particular purpose, whatever you're collecting it for. Say, for example, you're kind of retailer, for example. You're collecting all you need is basically their first name, second name, their address, their phone number, their email address. That's probably about 5 details you need in the order they've made ready, of course, so to deliver that product. Now, if you're collecting more details like their date of birth, their gender, probably their nationality, which you may not need it for doing a delivery to an item to the door, really. Which means you got to think about what you kind of gathering data on. The lower you gather, the less risk you hold basically with yourself. So I think data minimization are the key principles. Actually, you want to think about what systems you use. Do they really need to capture all this data? Accuracy, you want to make sure whatever you hold or whatever you process is accurate, up to date. I'm sure nobody would want their names to be spelt wrong. Nobody would want their addresses to be wrong on deliveries and stuff. So of course, accuracy is the key aspect of any data kind of transaction. Same thing with time limitations. Now, generally, I think traditionally what organizations have been used to is keeping data for. Data is basically oil, as we say. Is people have been kind of keeping the data forever. They don't really delete the data. They don't get rid of it. They think probably, I'm sure there are other ways they can use it in the future. So they keep it. But I think the key is to understand exactly how long you can keep that data. Retention is quite a good kind of aspect of understanding whether you really need that data forever. Do you need it for 6 months? Do you need it for 1 year? You've got to think about how long you actually need it. You've got a legal obligation to keep it for 5 years. Whatever it is, you've got to define that, make sure you record it, make sure you follow that. And integrity, of course, integrity and confidentiality is about security of the data itself. You've got to make sure you've got the right technical and security controls for keeping that data safe and secure. And the last one is being the accountability. Accountability is all about making sure you can evidence that you're doing what you're saying that you're doing. So that's the big change in terms of the new principle, actually, new principle you want to call it, or I think it's the key kind of the aspect where ICO are looking forward to it, that if there is an audit, they want to know exactly what you're doing with the data that you hold or process, really, and how you can evidence that you're actually complying with these principles, 7 principles on the top. Some of these rights, so I'm sure you know all of these rights, but I'm just going to quickly run through with each of them, or some of them at least. So right to be informed as a data subject, if I'm giving my data away to an organization, I would like to know what you're doing with it and how you're going to use it, how you're going to process it, what you're going to be using it for. So I have the right to be informed. So that means as an organization, the organization would need to be in a position to know exactly which processes in that organization that data is being used, which means as an organization, we have got a big challenge to understand when we collect the data, when we process the data, which processes across the business use that data. Make sure you kind of record that somewhere. You've got some records which can actually define. So in case in the future, a data subject like us, basically any of us, really, whoever the personal data is collected on, a data subject comes back and says that I would like to retrieve my data. I would like to see what data you hold about me. You know exactly what systems it sits on. You know exactly which processes the data is being used. So you can grab that, capture that, and then provide it to the individual if need be. So right to be informed is one of the main. Same thing, right of access, as I mentioned. As an individual, I have a right to access my data on what you hold about me. I have a right to actually see whether it's actually you have a lawful basis of processing that data. As an organization, that's again challenging because an organization needs to know exactly where it sits, where it's being used, where it flows, which department is being used in. So that's the challenge for the organization. Right to rectification, of course, I have a right to change whatever is incorrect on my data that the organization holds. Same for the right to erasure. If you're using, say, consent as a lawful basis of processing of the data, you want to make sure that you're giving too many rights to them, really, in that case, really. So you want to make sure you check what kind of lawful basis you're using for processing of that particular data. Right to restrict processing, of course, if you're using legitimate interest as your lawful basis, the individual gets the right to restrict processing. So in case of marketing, probably I believe is the most common example. Some people, or some organizations have been using legitimate interest as a lawful basis of processing for marketing, because there isn't, consent is difficult to get going forward. So they've been kind of trying to use legitimate interest. It's not going to be so easy, to be honest, actually, because with lawful legitimate interest, you've got to definitely show that or prove that the individual or the person you're trying to market has a legitimate interest in getting your newsletter or your advertisement material or whatever it is. So that's going to be quite challenging, but they get the rights to restrict that processing if required. Data portability, of course, a little bit of a new right in that aspect, that individuals do have a right to kind of move the data from one provider to another provider if they would like, and the organization needs to be in a position to be able to move that electronically or hand them in a format that can be used or transferred to the other organization. Right to object, of course, got a right to object if I think it's not being used lawfully or it's been kept beyond a particular reason. Of course, if it's being used in some kind of an automated way, and if the result of the automated decision making is going to be impacting that individual, the individual gets a right saying that, okay, I would like to understand what kind of profiling you're doing on my data, how you're going to be using it, what kind of automated systems or algorithms you're using. So it's got to be more about transparency in that aspect, that you kind of say that exactly what you're doing with that data and if it's going to be used for automated decision making. Now, as I mentioned, that was only 2 slides of GDPR. I don't want to talk too much about it because I'm sure it's all been repeated all over the place. 120 days, as I mentioned, it's only from today. It's about 120 days to the kind of hitting the deadline, and the key is we haven't got even 120 days, to be honest, actually, because I'm sure nobody would want to work weekends on GDPR. I'm 100% sure, unless I can see some hands over here now. Nobody. Oh, there you go. Somebody there at least, yeah. So, okay, so it's only 84 days left, to be honest, actually, for the GDPR. So I just wanted to sort of talk a little bit about, how to approach it, really. What's the easiest and the quickest way to approach that change, really, or, bring that change in the business or in the organization. So simple strategy, 4 phases. Generally, I think what I generally recommend is to start with like a chain of things, but the first phase being the preparation phase, where you want to at least understand who is responsible for it, who your key stakeholders are, who you're going to be involving, what your team is going to look like. You're going to get a bit of a governance at least around that place, around that kind of program at least. So make sure you got your working group ready. Working group could be, the team key function leads, maybe, I suppose, whoever is leading that business kind of area. And steering committee could be, of course, your executive leadership or somebody. Teams, as I mentioned, it could be HR, IT, legal, marketing, infosec, audit, risk, program management office, and compliance. Basically anybody, actually, to be honest. I think anybody and everybody in the business. It's mainly the business leads, really. But first thing you want to do is, of course, if you haven't done it yet, I'm sure most of you have gone through this phase, but it's about getting, making people aware about what is changing, why is it changing, and what needs to be done for it. So raising awareness is going to be one of the first key reasons you want to start with, at least for the preparation. The second thing, once you've kind of, raised awareness around it, people in the business know about what is changing, you kind of start building up a picture of who holds what data in their function. And it could be easily done. You don't have to buy tools for it. I've been through different organizations. I've been through bigger organizations, small organizations. I think you could easily do it depending on how much data you hold in the business, even with kind of manual methods. You don't have to buy tools and products and all those things to do all that. I'm sure probably vendors wouldn't be happy with that, but there are ways to do it. You just send out questionnaires. You kind of gather the information of what kind of things, the functions hold in personal data, where they hold, how they hold it, what kind of systems they store it on. So general questionnaires, I can show you one of them at the end of it. We sent across. It's a basic kind of a format to capture the data in an easy way, and it hopefully should be in a quicker way. It shouldn't be that bad, really, depending on availability of the people, of course. But data mapping and data flows are the first things you want to probably start with, at least. So data mapping is all about making sure which functions hold what data, why do they hold it, what's the legal basis or lawful basis they've got to hold that data or process the data, which kind of processes happen in that particular function. So you could probably even start with a data flow map, which actually tells you exactly where data starts to enter your business. For an HR, of course, for an employee data, it's got to be HR, most likely. They would be either coming in from recruitment agencies, some CVs, They would probably be coming in from third parties, could be coming in from directly from individuals on a job you posted on the website. So the first point of interaction of your touch point, you got to make sure you kind of capture all the entry points and flow through basically with that, build a picture of the flow really of that from the data. So HR might collect it, they might put there on the HRIS system. From that, it goes on to the different functions, different managers who might capture and look at their individual CVs, or might look at health and safety side of things, might go into the other departments as well about it. So just start building kind of a life cycle in that aspect of it really. And again, that doesn't take much. It takes a little bit of effort, of course. Depends on how detailed you want to go into that. You could probably build a detailed map, like a flow map if you like. Some people have recommended that. I've probably seen some visual maps which seem to be quite working actually. They seem to be quite good. I've even tried capturing them on a spreadsheet. I'll show you at the end of it. And those things can be easily captured. It's not difficult. It's about how much detail do you want to capture. So it depends on that. You can define tools really. I think probably the next presentation after me is from the IT governance. They've got a tool actually which captures, usually with a visual flow as well. It's really good tool as well, I thought really. But thing is, again, you don't have to buy in a tool specifically for a small, medium business. You don't want to be spending too much on, on a program. So if you want to capture on a spreadsheet or on documents, it is possible. I can show you that. So accountability is one of the key ones. Make sure you got at least some basic risk registers in place, all about the first kind of preparation phase really. Once the second phase is all about doing a gap analysis after that. So now the first picture you've got in your first phase is about what data each functions hold in their function, in their processes, where data flows from each functions to other functions, where is it actually, which processes are using personal data. Once you've got a bit of an understanding, you can start kind of doing a gap analysis in terms of these are my processes, these are all the systems that the data sits on, these are the flows it takes. You kind of start kind of building a picture to understand where the gaps are now. It could be a privacy gap. It could be that the data is being kept forever over one of the systems. You want to question that. Do you need that data for forever, or do you need it for only 2 years? So do you got a legal obligation to keep it for 6 years? So those kind of gaps you can start building after kind of the flow maps. You kind of either by interviews, or you can just the flow maps you've built. You can probably use that and then build that picture of understanding of what the risks are or the gaps are in that case. And so start with the data protection process, data processing activities basically to understand what the flow actually the personal data is taking with that. Same thing for the data breach incident. So I'm sure you will review your security in terms of what security controls are in place to whatever systems the data flows through, or the processes the data flows through actually. You can start kind of understanding what the risks on security specifically on that personal data lie with that. You can build kind of the picture risk register with that, which will include all the different risks, whether be it security or whether be it privacy in that case. Privacy, you've got to match it against the 7 principles. So all the risks of the gap you will identify will be against the seven or 8 principles, data protection principles they've got really. So at some point, the data might, say, for example, data might be captured in an HRIS system. At that point, do you got a privacy notice or privacy policy in that system which says that this is how we are going to be using the data really by, given by the HR or by other functions, or we're going to be distributing this data or sharing this data to a social benefit, health benefit provider or whatever it is. So you got to make sure you have exact understanding of what data, where it flows, so you can reflect that in the kind of the privacy notice itself. So, sorry, I was going back into the data breaches really. So you got to make sure that you got the right kind of the data breach incident procedures as well. You got the right data security controls for access control, encryption, data loss prevention, or whatever you want to call it. And then you kind of build those gaps into a roadmap to what changes it might require in the next phase of things. So again, if you did all that, I think within the first phase, you could probably do within the less than, depending on how big and small your organization is, of course. I've seen smaller organizations have been through within less than 30 days, you can do that really. It's not a major task. So you're still not well behind. You still can do all these things. It's quite possible. This is why I just want to talk about, because there's a lot of kind of misled information about, that it is a lot of things to do, really. Of course, there is a lot of things depending on the data processing activities that you carry out in your organization, of course. The roadmap will give you the workflows in terms of what the different workflows are in each of those functions or processes, what changes might need to be done to achieve the readiness of GDPR in that process. So think about in process-centric kind of way of working through, if you can, really, because that'll help you understand which processes need to be changed, which processes need to be, mapped against the risks or those kind of things, really. That'll really help and make it easy, actually, to sort of go through with that. Again, third-party engagement. Many processes might be sharing some data, personal data, with the third parties. I'm sure the HR would share with, most likely with payroll, some providers in the cloud, or they might share some data with, the HRS system, which sits in the clouds like SagePay or whatever. There's so many systems out there. I think most are cloud-based. So they might be having some kind of contractual agreements to storing that data. Identify what kind of contractual agreements, put in place in terms of data protection specific, which define the controls. If it's a US-based provider, you might want to check if they are actually, compliant to Privacy Shield. Are they kind of in the adequacy status if they're in another country or outside the EEA borders? So you want to ask all these questions when you look at the third party, when you identify the flows into the third parties, whether there are right engagements in place or right kind of contractual agreements in place. Again, implementation time, you've got to make sure you got the right procedures, you test them, you build those procedures, you kind of, involve all the right teams, you got the right people in place. So incident management data breach procedures are quite a key again. Consent privacy notices, make sure once you've kind of understood what changes need to be done, identify which are the touch points for the data subjects. You can reflect the being as transparent by using the privacy notices or consent notices or whatever it is. So make sure you got all that, really. The last, of course, is the education. You want to make sure that you educate your staff so everybody is aware what is expected of them. So you can also build a culture of kind of the data protection, basically. And that's how you kind of build an assurance kind of a framework and monitor and kind of review that framework. Of course, feedback, anything which you learn, and then kind of build up from that. Now, there's one thing about the cultural aspect, which is you've got to make sure that there are right processes in place about the privacy by design. So if there are any new initiatives starting in your kind of business, like say, for example, a new program is being initiated, it's which involves data transfer to a third country, a provider or something, make sure you kind of put some processes in place which capture the data protection requirements right at the onset. It's all about the privacy by design concept as mentioned by ICO, really. So make sure you got the right process in place. So it's a simple kind of the structure to four kind of the phases, and make sure you got all of that. Just last one or two slides, it wouldn't be more, sorry, John. So I think the key would be is think about the goals, what you want to achieve. The goals are generally the regulator will expect all of these at least things, which is about you've got a record of the records of processing the Article 30, you've got a process in place for the data protection impact assessment, you've got the documentation around it, you've got a process which actually captures all that data about being used in each of the programs, and make sure you got the right data protection by design, the staff training, breach notification. All of these things will be expected by the ICO or any regulator, really. The same thing on the data subject side, they will expect to have the right processes in place for subject access request, for rectification, erasure, data portability, and privacy notices in place. So make sure you look at the goals, really. Now, this is a quick kind of a snapshot of just one last 1, 2, or 2 slides. So this is just a quick capture of the data actually on all of the simple spreadsheet and how you capture that. And the last one is all about the data flow capture. So it basically captures all where the data is coming in from, how is it gathered, and where is it being used, what systems it sits on, what kind of privacy notice is in place, and all those questions. Now, slides will be available, I'm sure, probably on the website somewhere, so you will probably get a capture of all these questions as well. That's all. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry for the delay there. Thank you.
Yeah.